welcome. You know, I think I'm just going to sleep on one of these couches and stay here all day. Good to see you both. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Christine. Did you hear our last discussion?
Most of it.
What did they miss? What did they get wrong?
No, I think they did a great job framing. There's, you know, a lot of issues, and I just want to say it's great that you could all be here. You are officially at the cool kids table, right?
Yeah.
Biosimilars are the hot topic in pharmaceutical issues and spending. They're very pertinent to the current debate, and Dr. Gottlieb is certainly very laser focused on competition and the role that biosimilars can play in making sure patients have access to these amazing products.
Yeah, I mean, when I met with Scott Gottlieb last week and had the privilege of interviewing him, fun guy, I can't figure out how he gets on so well with Donald Trump and so many Democratic senators at the same time, but he's the only one in Washington doing that. And it's great to see someone, you know, really for whom there's such bipartisan support. But when I walked through the audience, as I tried to do this morning and talk to people about why they're here, it's interesting. I had 7 people out of about, I don't know, 200 attendees that said, please get him to talk about the biosimilar process, what's coming down the road, where does he see that? And he made the point that it wasn't just about competition, it was about getting different drugs into the landscape, I guess. And so let me, about that regulatory landscape, let me just drag the elephant out of the closet on this. What are the tension points in this discussion between the stakeholders? Because, you know, when I talked to Scott, he said that last year they had approved 1,100 generics. They'd gotten, you know, 4 or 5 biosimilars approved. So he says, I've doubled the number of biosimilars in a year that are out there. But in terms of this, there seems to be tension between different parts of industry. So what is going on?
Yeah, you know, I think we can learn a lot from history. And if we go back and look at the discussions about generics when they were first available in the United States back in the 1980s, and you read the literature is full of articles that talk about how these are inferior products. They'll never be the same as the branded counterparts, right? I think really the tension point is, you know, after having years of experience with generics and now knowing what we know about them, it's kind of worth starting all over again with biosimilars because it's a new concept, right? It's a new regulatory concept in the United States.
But my understanding is that the complexity is off the chart with biosimilars, and generics are easy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are different types of products, right? There are different kind of molecules, and for a small molecule structure, you know, the regulatory requirements are 2 things. It has to be identical through those analytical studies, plus it needs to show bioequivalence, right? And we were, I guess not in the 1980s, a little bit scared, if you will, about that, right? And concerned about that, but now we know better, and we know that generics are, you know, have really helped out in terms of a lot of things in the United States. So when you start to translate that now to a biologic, you know, and you look at this much more complex molecule, and biologics, we know biologics just inherently are a heterogeneous population, right, within that product that's being administered to a patient. So you can't have that identicality requirement. It's replaced with something called highly similar. And that's a term we've never heard before. They don't teach us that in pharmacy school. They don't teach us that in medical school. But it is an industry standard, right? Over time, a manufacturer, when they make manufacturing changes, they have to demonstrate that the post-change is highly similar to their pre-change product. So it's something that's been out there for a long time. It's just that we haven't heard of that before. We're not used to it. So I think that's where a lot of the concerns are coming from. And then the second aspect of that, which is the part of the regulatory requirements for a biosimilar, which is no clinically meaningful differences, notwithstanding you know, minor differences in active components. You know, that will be demonstrated through additional data above bioequivalence. Bioequivalence will still be there, but you need, you know, PD data and possibly some clinical comparative studies if, you know, there isn't a good PD marker. So I think with all of this additional data, I think that's where people start to think about, well, is there a concern with this because it requires additional data? But from my standpoint as a provider, as a clinician, you know, I look at that and say, well, this regulatory process looks great in terms of making me feel confident that these products are actually equivalent to the reference product.
Christine, with the Biosimilars Association, I assume you're members that are involved in this. What are the biggest complaints you folks have about the approval and regulatory process?
Well, I think that there is an eagerness for the additional guidances that we know the agency has forthcoming. And
So tell me what that means in my language.
Sure. So, well, Dr. Gottlieb's announced this Biosimilars Action
Right.
Plan, so we're all waiting eagerly for that. And we're hoping for additional clarity on issues like extrapolation, although that's pretty well characterized now, and also interchangeability and some of the other issues around the level of studies required. We're hoping for the FDA to continue to learn from the European experience. We're hoping that we have the opportunity to use reference product from Europe that's been approved through the EU and those biosimilar products as well to help us characterize and get approvals for US-based.
So walk us down the extrapolation field for a minute, which I know has been one of the big arenas of concern, and maybe for those lay people watching online, kind of explain to them what the challenges are in the extrapolation side and the different impacted communities and how medicine and populations sort of hit.
Well, I'll have to defer to Dr. Lee for some of that, but I think that the FDA has been very...
Oops, we're going to hand you a mic.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Everyone, this is Emily. Big round of applause for Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
Yay.
So of the biosimilars that have been approved, extrapolation has been permitted by the FDA, meaning that if it's approved for one indication,
right,
that can be extrapolated to additional indications with the same evidence. So there's
but isn't
no
there
additional
danger
studies.
in that bridging, or no?
Well, the FDA doesn't believe so. And I think it's really important to go back to what Dr. Lee said, that the FDA is the gold standard for, medicine approvals in this country and really globally. And when you have the FDA saying this biosimilar has no clinically meaningful differences, this biosimilar has met all of the standards for approval, then you can take that to the bank. You can take that to your patients, and you can prescribe and provide these products. But I'll let Dr. Lee.
Yeah.
Are you, well, just before Dr. Lee, are you allowed to talk about factions in your industry?
Well, I would say
what I've learned is that there are some in your industry that are totally cool with the process now, and there are others members you have that are not totally. Is that fair?
I think there are always those who are always going to want, to continue to deliver as quickly as possible these medicines to the patients. And so there are always those who are going to, push in a productive way, in a constructive way, the FDA to do more and to do it with more efficiency. We do pay biosimilar user fees, and so we do have expectations that are, codified in statute about deadlines and so forth, and the FDA is doing a fantastic job. I think, the real problem with getting biosimilars into the hands of patients is not so much the FDA, it's all of some of the things that the previous speakers touched on with the rebate trap and the anti-competitive behavior, misinformation campaigns by other factions in the biosimilars. There are pure player biosimilars, and then there are innovator companies that also make biosimilars who tend to promote biosimilars in a way that says they're very safe, ours especially. And that's an important kind of going back to Dr. Lee's point about the evolution of the confidence of patients and prescribers, generics. Generics are not made in bathtubs. They're not made in people's garages, right? Those were the myths that had to be sort of overcome starting in the mid-'80s when the statutory parameters were put in place. And we're seeing some of that with biosimilars, which we really shouldn't have to see, because I think all of that, there's a lot more transparency now, and there should be a lot of confidence.
Edward, let me ask you a question here, and again, this may seem out of left field, but recently I had a terrific exchange in Aspen with folks in both dealing in kind of the world of Alzheimer's and another world dealing with the world of autism, particularly just impacted families and kids. And some of the people that they had assembled did not come out of the traditional healthcare industry. They came out of Google and information processing and sort of computer tech. arenas of sort of looking at genetic data and beginning to organize and process it. And in the world of personalized medicine, immunotherapy coming along, genetic design, these are all topics. I don't know how relevant they are to the biosimilar side, but it occurred to me whenever I see this and encounter someone completely new to a topic that I found unexpected, I always wonder how siloed is the discussion we're having today. I mean, if ASCO here is in town, are they reaching out to other parts of the innovative world, the other parts of the tech world to involve and see where they are? So when we talk about this, are there from your experience as a doctor in this, are there silos and blind spots we should be worried about that bringing in some people from other sectors might be useful?
Yeah, I think if you look at the white papers that have been historically and recently published,
right.
We talk about how all stakeholders should be part of the process. And I think it starts within these factions, these professional factions, pharmacists, physicians, advanced practitioners, and
the usual crowd.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the biggest pieces that's been missing from the conversation historically has been patients, and and it's great to kind of bring in more of the patient perspective into things, address some of the concerns. And
so, what is the patient voice? Because we have a lot of patient advocacy groups here. Yeah. Where does the patient voice get you?
Yeah, so, and this goes back to my personal experience as a pharmacist, going back to when I was a pharmacy intern and the one bringing people up at the cashier, at the cash register when I'm handing their medications over. And, people have questions about generic medications and whether or not they're just as good as the branded counterpart that they used to get. And part of my job as a pharmacist or a pharmacy intern at the time was to provide that confidence to the patient, right? And so I think part of this is understanding where the patients are coming from, what are their concerns, what are their questions, and we as healthcare practitioners need to be equipped with understanding what are these products so that we can adequately address their concerns.
When you were to sort of reframe this, I think one of the tension points about biosimilars, and I want to go to the audience here pretty soon for their thoughts as well, but if you were to change any aspect of the regulatory process from your perspective,
right.
What would it be?
You're giving me a very, very powerful.
I do want to make you a powerful man this morning.
And
just take over.
I was joking to somebody the other day that changing laws takes an act of Congress, which is harder than an act of God. So
do it by executive authority.
Right.
Yeah.
So
executive order. We're all living by executive orders
right.
today. Nothing passes
right.
Congress.
I think one issue that is just strange at the moment is the issue of interchangeability. And I understand kind of where, in terms of when the law was passed, where they were going. They wanted to create kind of this designation that was almost, it was analogous to kind of what we have for generics. We have
right.
Equivalence ratings for generics that say, a pharmacist like myself can substitute these products without having to contact the prescriber, right? And so they wanted something like that, but when they wrote that into the laws, they wrote in kind of this switching back and forth as being part of that. And so now you've got kind of this criteria where it's causing a lot of confusion because people think that if something is not designated as being interchangeable, you can't substitute that for the reference product. And so I think if I were to change anything, maybe it's kind of the communication about what all this means, and that interchangeability really is more of a designation that would allow a pharmacist to independently substitute something according to state pharmacy practice laws.
And Christine, finally, one of the raw nerves that I ran into in this topic last year, I think you may have been there when I interviewed Congressman Welch, was the issue of the data and material that, as I understand it, is expected from the incumbent holders of patents to the biosimilar industry that are trying to. Now, I find there are all sorts of weird incentives in that, or disincentives, like why, if I had a drug, would I want to share the data with that? But apparently that's expected and part of the system. But I guess in this, and I think I don't often talk about underwriters in this, and so I'm not doing that. I'm just talking about this company called Amgen that just happens to be here today. But I know Amgen's on both sides of the line, right? So they've got large biologic industry, and they're building a biosimilar industry as well. there are some that are not on both sides, and so when you kind of look, and so they understand the sort of level that you're at, I assume. But if you have someone that is basically coming into this industry that's sort of looking and dependent upon other incumbent players, is that a problem for you? I mean, in your industry, do you find this sort of big pharma? I remember playing pharma in a kind of mock Shakespeare thing. It's called Will on the Hill. Anybody from DC go to Will on the Hill? Oh yeah, you've been to Will on the Hill? Put your hand up there, be proud. So I played pharma this is a mock Shakespeare theory. They raise about $500,000 for kids in the art, and we have senators and journalists and Wolf Blitzer and all of that stuff up there playing odd roles. And were you at Will on the Hill when I played pharma?
No,
I had the voice of Darth Vader
around,
when I played the role. But you know, are the large pharmaceutical players a barrier to your success?
Well, you know, first of all, I just want to say we absolutely applaud innovation, and innovation is very important to both the generic and the biosimilars manufacturers. That's our pipeline, right? So that's critically important. And God bless them, they have plenty of patent life to enjoy, plenty of monopoly, 12 years of market exclusivity right off the bat, and then additional patents. That has become a problem. You know, Dr. Gottlieb has referred to these patent thickets where companies, even at the end, toward the end of their patent life, will turn around and do, you know, 75, 80 patents, 75 for Humira in the last 3 years prior to the expiration of its patent. Humira will now be
part of me would say, wouldn't you do that?
Until 2034. Yeah. And, you know, that's bad for patients. Other barriers are these rebate traps where, you know, some innovator companies, or all the innovator companies, offer rebates to payers and for formulary placement. They bundle the rebates, kind of like Verizon bundles all your cable and wireless, et cetera. And if you cannot, when a biosimilar comes on the market, they'll take away the rebate, the whole entire bundle, if you're a payer and you want to put the biosimilar on your formulary. So you really can't afford to do that because you still have to pay for other products, and now you'll miss out on all these rebates. These are barriers. There's other anti-competitive barriers, like innovators blocking access to samples of the reference-listed drug that you know, you need to manufacture the biosimilars. So I would commend to you this white paper that just came out Wednesday called Breaking Through on Biosimilars. It tries to answer the question, why aren't patients getting these things? And it's on our website, biosimilarscouncil.org, and you can find it there, free, download it, it's all yours. But it's really about getting them into the hands of patients.
Final 2 seconds, because you're involved with it, how would you grade yourself in terms of connectivity with patient advocacy groups?
I think we are continuing to build those bridges. The innovators kind of had a lock on that for a long time for understandable reasons, and it's something that we're building, and we are eager, and that's why we're here at ASCO, to continue to meet with more and more patient advocacy groups. We've done a lot in that area, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you. Let me open up to you. Questions? We have questions, comments. I will call, I've got, you can't always go back to him, right?
Okay, just a quick question and a comment. We've seen, and generics and biosimilars are different, but generics have had lots of supply issues. I mean, as a clinician, I am always running around trying to find generics. What's to say if we switch to biosimilars, we're not going to see these same supply issues? I mean, what's the point of having an approved, even cheaper, more accessible drug when it's not available to actually prescribe?
Great. So the question is on supply of biosimilars. You know, you're always there. He makes a comment that he's scrambling to find generics. What are the supply challenges?
You know, supply challenges are a consideration, and I feel your pain, and it's an important issue. You know, with biosimilars, it's hard to say what will happen. Again, 10 approved, only 3 on the market. I don't think we have a good sample size. Hopefully, I think everyone is keenly aware. The FDA is taking steps also to address drug shortages and supplies. Just yesterday, I think this was announced, some opportunities for companies to be more forthcoming about the status of their product lines and the availability of their inventory. So I think that will all be helpful. No one wants to see shortages. It's not good for anyone. It's not good for people trying to sell medicine. It's not good for people trying to prescribe medicine. It's not good for patients. So I think if we all continue to work together on that.
Just out of the 10 that have been approved, what's the cost savings, the average cost savings across all of them?
Well, only 3 are on the market.
Oh, 3 on the market,
Only 2 with any sort of uptake.
Okay.
One came in at 15% off the innovator price, and the other one around about the same. So we don't really have full data on on how much has been saved thus far.
I see. Interesting. Thank you. Yes. Hi.
Oh, hi. Yamile.
She's afraid you're going to take that mic and not
I know.
let go.
I'm terrified also. So thank you for that. This question is somewhat related, and I was brought up through the first forum in terms of access versus quality,
Right.
all of that. My question to you all is, what do you all know in terms of the plans to heavily disseminate to under-resourced facilities? So as an advocate of advocates,
Right.
There are facilities that have the resources for accreditation, have the resources for CME, and to support providers who can then support patients. There are other facilities that disproportionately serve rural populations, African Americans, Latinos, and other marginalized and resilient patients who don't have those resources. So what is the biosimilar industry, or what are the plans to disproportionately serve under-resourced facilities who have disproportionate barriers?
So it's really a question about accessibility, but also looking about the under-resourced, yeah, wait, Christine, go back. Disparities. Okay, disparities in access. Ed?
Yeah, I think this all goes back to competition and price, right? And historically speaking, with any of the products that we have out there, as the price comes down, access goes up. And that's been true for just about everything. And so I think that's one way in terms of if we kind of let the market do what it does, and price, there's more competition, which leads to lower prices. I think you'll see some access go up, specifically in those populations that are disadvantaged.
I think it's really important. I don't know if anybody from ASCO is here, but in terms of your guys' industry, that you're here obviously for this conference going on, one of the things that I see around the country, we just did a big program in Las Vegas, for instance, and it was, again, the cancer area. It's one of the places where there just it's an enormous deficit in infrastructure around cancer, which they're trying to sort of develop and bring in. And, I've never met a group of more earnest, great people coming together trying to sort of move the needle on accessibility and looking at communities that are having a problem. And I was just hearing about parts of Texas that are dealing with a lot of their problems from our friends at livestrong.org. We're talking about Texas and what's going on in these areas where infrastructure has sort of collapsed and fallen in, and so people are coming in and kind of rebuilding it. But as you do this, it's one of the questions I have in this industry in healthcare broadly. Again, it comes back to literacy. Why is it so difficult to blanket our healthcare system broadly, not just cancer, but broadly, with kind of knowledge, best practices, options on the market, and dealing with, the so-called left behind or neglected markets versus those that are robust? Why is it as patchwork as it is?
Oh, I think that is the point. And I just
want
to say thank you for the work that you do. It's because we do have a highly fragmented, that's the basic problem with reform in our healthcare system. It's highly fragmented with a lot of competing incentives that are very opaque. And that's really the heart of the matter, I think.
And on that wonderfully optimistic note, I want to thank Christine Simmons and Edward Lee. Thank you both so much for joining us.